company offers a range of models, and business is booming. So, where do the bikes come from? This bike, it's made in Germany.
No, it's not made in Germany.
But it's a German brand.
Yeah, it's a German brand.
So where does the frame come from?
Like so many things, the frame comes from China. It's painted and assembled in Taiwan. Quality control all happens here.
Wait, just.
Kontrolliert.
A bike designed in Germany, assembled in Taiwan from components manufactured in China. Made in this way, a bike like this pays a 15% import duty when it arrives in the EU. But if it was shipped directly to Germany from a factory in China, the importer would have to pay almost 50% in punitive tariffs. Why? Because a Chinese company can make bikes much more cheaply than a German firm ever could.
20 years growing. Has become the world's largest.
Sorry, what is he said 50%?
So if you import the bike assembled from Taiwan, you pay 50% import duties. But if you import it unassembled, you only pay 15%.
15%.
15%. So the point here is that basically they're protecting their laborers by imposing a higher import duty on assembled bicycles, because they want to avoid that all the assembly jobs are being exported to low-wage countries.
Bicycle manufacturing leading enterprises. The group we have established.
In this promotional video, Chinese bicycle manufacturer Fushida claims it has the largest bike factory in the world.
International first-class production technology. And more than 100 robots welding machine.
Companies like these are subsidized by the Chinese government. But that's just one reason Chinese products are so cheap. There's also scale.
Are creating miracles one after another.
With a production capacity of 100 million bicycles a year, China could quickly swamp the world with its products.
Various projects all over the world.
Companies like Wolfgang Renner's would go under, so he sees the import tariffs as protecting Europe's bicycle manufacturing industry.
Sometimes you have to have protectionism. It's unavoidable. The point is that in business, you need a fair playing field. You can see it in other areas too, where government subsidies keep other manufacturers from competing because the market is distorted.
So it's about jobs in Europe?
Sure, it's about jobs and fairness.
The import duty ensures that Chinese bikes are more expensive when purchased in Europe. Punitive tariffs, a form of pure protectionism. But there are ways around them. For instance, having the bike frames that are produced in China finished in Taiwan. Then punitive tariffs don't apply. The final assembly of bicycles made with Chinese frames then takes place in Europe. It's an industry that provides 100,000 jobs on the continent.
Oh, they make it in Europe.
Renner is glad that protectionist tariffs keep Chinese competitors out of Europe's markets. But the international trade in bicycles is a hotly fought segment, and the companies trying to grab a slice of the pie will go to great lengths to do so. Not long after the EU implemented punitive tariffs on bikes from China, they began to arrive from Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia, and other places. When it grew clear that the bikes were actually being made by Chinese firms, punitive tariffs against those countries were put in place. Then, Tunisia began exporting them, and was soon slapped with tariffs. Today, components for the bikes are still mostly made in China, but the frames are finished elsewhere, like Taiwan. Because that's where the rules say value is added, the bikes are then no longer subject to punitive tariffs when they're imported into the EU. So what happens when the market...
Taiwan is more cheaper for import tax.
Yes,
for bicycles isn't protected by high import
But actually,
duties.
Taiwan adds only very little value.
Value added.
Yeah.
In the U.S. city of Philadelphia, bike store owner Brian Cathwick used to sell exclusively American brands that had been produced domestically. But that changed a few years ago. There are still American brand names, but the bikes all originate in the same place.
Made in China. It doesn't matter which the manufacturer is. Whether it's Trek, whether it's Cannondale, whether it's Specialized, all their bikes at some price point or at some level are made in China.
Without protectionist policies like those in Europe, he says Chinese bikes have flooded the market in the U.S., and that has in turn destroyed a lot of jobs in the country, especially in his home state of Pennsylvania, where the bike manufacturing industry once flourished. The store owner says it's not a good feeling to promote the sellout of the domestic sector by selling cheap imports, but what choice does he have?
Keeps my family fed. You know, I own 2 different bicycle shops. To be able to offer my consumer a bike for under $400 that has gears, to be able to offer a bike for under $300 that's like a single speed ride around the city, it's nice to be able to do that.
President Trump has threatened many sectors with punitive tariffs, but not the bike industry. In general, Cathwick is critical of protectionist measures, but he would have made an exception for bicycles.
It depends on what perspective you're looking from.
But this one is actually, this bike is assembled at California, but parts imported from China.
Yep.
And from assembled bicycles export to Europe, right?
Yeah. Or yeah. So the bikes that are
Consumed
sold
in the States.
So all the bikes are the frames are being made in China. Then some additional work is done in low import duty countries, and then the final import happens from that low import duty country. So bikes basically are just still being produced in China. They just move through a third country in order to reduce the import duties.
But actually, Trump will want to charge for this component.
Well, so that's where basically he will be wrong, because people will find in people like this bicycle shop owner, he will start to import bicycles not from China but from Taiwan, who actually originate from China, but
Oh, I mean China to Taiwan to America.
Yeah.
You know, people who have lost their jobs because it's been farmed out to China or Taiwan, they'll probably have a very different view than somebody who's never been affected by that.
But isn't free trade supposed to bring more prosperity for everyone? American woes in many areas of trade can't just be traced back to China, but also to Germany, says Professor Herbert Dieter. He teaches his university students in Friedrichshafen that being an export giant also has a dark side. German products sell well internationally, not just because they're high quality, but also because wages in the country have only climbed moderately in recent years, while the euro has remained relatively weak. Trump is angry about the trade imbalance, and Dieter says he has a point.
Surpluses in Germany mean deficits in other countries. Germany expects the rest of the world to go into debt with Germany, but also likes to criticize the rest of the world for being too deeply in debt. It wants to have its cake and eat it.
Germany really does profit immensely from global trade. In 2017, it exported goods worth over 1.2 trillion euros. Like China, that makes the EU a big net exporter. Germany has a whopping 250 billion euros trade surplus. The US has a deficit of around 500 billion, with many more goods and services flowing in than flowing out. Ongoing debt has long-term consequences for America.
It means 500 billion is export to the state.
Yeah, that's the trade deficit. So that's the balance actually.
From Europe to states, right?
Well, not only Europe. No, actually, that's the entire trade balance, I think.
One country's loss is another's gain. We head next for Bavaria. On the river Saale here, Manfred Schmidt works for Schaeffler, a company making products that are often exported to the US. He earns a good salary and can afford to buy the things he wants. That includes many products made available by free global trade.
Monday.com is a team management tool that changed my life, because my day used to be wasted on a marketing meeting, carefully reminding Jessica of
Aid. Just like most households all over the world, the Schmidt's home is full of things made in other countries. Is anything here in their living room actually made in Germany?
Very little. If we got rid of everything that wasn't made in Germany, there'd be nothing left.
With one exception, the antique sewing machine proudly on display. What about clothing? We take a look in the family closet.
Made in Turkey,
Made in Bangladesh, sogar.
designed in Germany, made in China.
Even their pantry is full of food from all over the world. The Schmidts have had personal experience with how quickly you can lose in the free trade game. Manfred Schmidt nearly lost his job when Schaeffler wanted to move his plant to a cheaper location abroad.
Germany.
Yes.
The employees' fight to keep the plant drew national attention. Schmidt and his colleagues came to an agreement with the company. It worked for a while.
For 10 years, we put in 5 unpaid hours a week. And then they came overnight and said, "We're closing the plant." That was a shock for all of us who worked there, because we were all thinking, we do 5 hours a week for free, so that's a pretty sum the company is getting for nothing.
The shadow side of globalization. Manfred Schmidt was lucky. He was able to stay with the company, but he had to move to another plant.
Everything's all sweetness and light now, and they act like we're the winners, because we make good money in the industry. But that's down to relocations and plant closures. We were lucky to get positions in Schweinfurt, but in another company, they might just let everyone go, and those people will be the losers.
Manufacturers usually go where it's cheapest. We take a look at the Schmidt family bicycles. The brands are all German. But we know where they were all made, at least the frames. Cheap production in China that cost hundreds of thousands of jobs, especially in the US. Back to Philadelphia. The city is a dynamic, growing urban center. But in the surrounding region, the factories and jobs have disappeared, like in many parts of the U.S. Sarah Parker and her neighbor Susan Schweikert don't count themselves as losers in the globalization era, and they don't like Donald Trump. But they're on a mission. Buy American. Sarah has a popular website, and Buy American is its clarion call.
Some games, like board games.
Okay.
I mean, USA, so...
In her USA Love List, she gives thousands of fans advice on how to replace products made in other parts of the world. She says it's about their jobs.
Oh, check it out. American flags. You wouldn't believe how often American flags are not even made in the United States.
This is made in the United States.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh good. I like it when they put the label
Say
really
made in the United
big
States.
on the front because people really do care about that. This was made in a small town somewhere, I'm sure. I don't know where.
But this video going to tell this content is not made in the USA, right? Huh?
The content is actually made in Germany.
Right?
Yeah.
But by looking for the Made in USA label, I'm supporting that small town and the people who made it.
Parker says she herself experienced how jobs moved south of the border to Mexico and depopulated whole areas as the factories died.
China.
Yeah.
She decided to do something about it.
My first job after college was selling Chevrolet. I went back a few years ago and that dealership is closed, weeds growing, completely abandoned. It's sad to see. And the pride that people have when they build something and then are able to purchase it, I think that we've lost that.
It's often hard to determine the origin of global products. That's the new norm. The two Americans say that should bother us more.
You know, they don't have to tell you where things are made. I think it's only food things and cars. So we're actually lucky they give us as much information as they do.
Parker admits that she made an exception when she bought a Volvo. The Swedish car maker now belongs to a Chinese multinational. In her household, she says she's trying to buy only American-made products, with, at times, limited success.
So there's some things that I'm not sure, but I know the KitchenAid is assembled in Ohio. I think I read that the bowl is made in Korea. I know that
That's
the toaster
definitely made in
is not.
China.
You cannot buy an American-made toaster. I thought this was American-made
the label is.
because it says General Electric.
Her initiative sounds like it has a nationalist agenda. Parker says it all boils down to a matter of choice.
I think it's only nationalistic if you are saying we're only going to buy American-made products. We make a lot of choices as consumers. We choose things because they have recycled content in them, or we choose things because they reflect a particular lifestyle that we want. Choosing something that's made either in your own community or your own country is just another consumer choice. I'm glad that we have those choices, which is why, for me at least, it's not a nationalistic effort.
So what would happen if we all followed her advice and tried to buy only products made domestically? If borders closed and protectionism reigned? It's happened before. At the beginning of the 20th century, world trade and globalization really took off, but it soon hit major speed bumps. The U.S. slid into the Great Depression. Germany faced a huge economic crisis of its own. And protectionism suddenly reared its head. Voices calling for isolationist policies grew loud. During the 1930s, the U.S. began to adopt an increasingly aggressive protectionist stance, raising tariffs drastically to protect American industries and jobs. Germany also put up barriers to international trade. The mixture of protectionism and nationalism ended in the horrors of the Second World War.
Now it's the same.
Right, this is scary, no?
There were disastrous developments in world trade. In terms of volume, it fell by 2/3 within 4 years. By today's standards, that's unimaginable. If we saw a 5% fall in trade, people would call it a major crisis. But back then, it fell drastically and dramatically. And that development can be traced back to protectionist policies put in place by the United States of America.
To prevent other major conflicts, the body that would eventually become the World Trade Organization was set up, headquartered in Geneva. Its fundamental principle, that free trade brings prosperity for all, has never really been accepted. On the contrary, the WTO has come under heavy fire in recent years. And the U.S., led by Donald Trump, largely ignores it. Is protectionism set to send the world into a new economic and political tailspin? Or are dire predictions just half the story? In the town of Mühlacker in the German state of Baden-Württemberg, the Steuler Group makes tiles. Business is brisk. The construction industry is healthy. But the business is facing stiff competition from China. Tiles from there are unbeatably cheap. So the EU has put punitive tariffs in place. Tiles imported from China now have an import duty of 26.3%, protecting jobs here from Asian competitors. If they didn't exist, says Wilson, baths and kitchens in Germany would soon all be tiled with Chinese products.
I think it's justified in the current climate because the competitive situation is unbalanced.
Currently, there are 27% import duty,
Right.
but this company is they are making board by themselves, right? So, what's going on?
So what's going on is that basically they do not import them. Eh?
Yeah,
They do not. They make the tiles themselves.
that's right.
Yeah.
What's going on?
What do you mean? What's going on? What-
He just make by himself, but in future he is going to import.
Oh, yeah, that's very well possible. I mean, it's possible that actually he will start to import and diversify his portfolio, taking advantage of the of his distribution channel. But I don't know whether this is a long-term solution. I don't know whether they can become cheaper. I mean, basically, the argument for free trade is usually that you want to impose tariffs only to protect the infant industry, so the new industry, the weaker industries who need some time away from foreign competition in order to develop themselves and to become competitive. That's the free trade argumentation for tariffs.
But actually,
this is not.
This is not
Right.
But, he had better import instead of manufacture this one.
Right. But what happens is the EU recognizes that they will never be able to produce at the same cost level because labor is involved. Now, it is in the best interest for the European citizens to say, well, we want to keep those jobs, therefore they're going to impose these import duties.
But he himself had better import this product from China. It's more cheaper.
That's probably cheaper, but now then if he imports it, he needs to pay 27%.
It's still 27% tax, but still cheaper.
Right. So you mean basically just forget about producing them and selling them. Yeah, but that means that he needs to bankrupt his company. Yeah?
If I'm this company, I just try to import every product specification for Chinese company.
Right.
Change specification, the same one,
Right.
and he can get half price.
But that means that basically he needs to bankrupt his company, start a new company, and import and sell imported tiles. You know. But the EU thought that was not, and I'm sure that part of the reason why these tariffs came into existence is that he actually explained this to them, and because the EU thought, okay, this is not good, they actually say, okay, well, please keep your factory alive. We will protect you. So until they do that, he has the EU by the balls, as they say. He probably explained to them that he will go bankrupt the minute they will reduce those.
If time goes by,
Yeah.
his company will bankrupt. So before his company bankrupt, he just make contract with Chinese company to import this product from China. Chinese company cannot sell in Germany because they don't have selling market.
Right, but that will change quickly. I think I wouldn't be surprised if an entrepreneur like him actually lobbied for these import duties and say, okay, well, if you don't do this, then I will close my factory. Period.
product. We know that Chinese manufacturers are selling their overcapacities internationally at very, very low prices.
Overcapacity.
And that puts us in a situation where we can no longer be competitive.
So dumping, yeah.
We can't keep up if we have to play by those rules.
Punitive tariffs on tiles is also a protectionist measure, but it keeps people in jobs in Germany and helps push for better production and environmental standards.
We produce here in Germany. We're expected to comply with laws that are relevant in Germany, and we do. So we exercise control over things like environmental aspects. Of course, we don't have that for products coming from abroad. Then there's the issue of weight versus value. Does it really make sense to transport these products over such long distances?
Without punitive tariffs, European tile makers wouldn't hold out long under the pressure exerted by their Chinese counterparts. If the EU hadn't instituted protectionist measures, the industry would soon disappear. And not just the tile industry. In all, the bloc has put punitive tariffs in place for 53 types of imports from China, among them steel, porcelain, and even ironing boards. The anti-dumping measures have been accepted by the WTO. Protectionism is alive, well, and apparently protecting jobs. But although the EU has taken measures to protect its businesses, it frowns on other countries trying to do the same. Cameroon. Mamembale is on her way to her plantation. The path takes her through the jungle. She's the head of a village cooperative located in the rainforest north of Yaoundé. The walk takes about an hour in each direction. There's no street.
She's walking inside.
The cooperative members harvested over 2 tons of onions here last year and sold the crop at a market in the distant capital. The proceeds fed the entire village.
What a genuine information.
Onions.
Onion!
We use onions as a remedy. For example, when you have digestive complaints. We use it as an antiseptic, and we make our sauces with onions. Cameroonians wouldn't know what to do without onions.
Now the women from the village are planting cassava instead, not because they want to, but because it no longer makes sense to plant onions. Onions imported from Europe have destroyed the market. To protect farmers like these, Cameroon would have to raise import duties even more. But it can't, because a new free trade agreement with the EU, called EPA, prohibits that.
Our onion fields stretched from here down to the river, and over there. But then we stopped being able to sell all of them because of the huge number of imports. That's why we had to stop growing them.
Onions are a staple here. The African country consumes hundreds of thousands of tons a year. Until now, they were all grown domestically. Just as they do every day, the women in the cooperative prepare dinner. For now, they still have their own onions.
So crude.
Produce that not only feeds them and their families, but also helps them survive.
Only family use.
No, it used to be different.
50 kilometers south, at a market in Yaoundé, it's growing harder and harder to find onions grown domestically. Every morning, trucks arrive here filled with onions. Most of them have been imported from Holland. They're the ones packaged in red nets. Mamembale has dressed up for the trip to Yaoundé to talk about the onion issue. She's meeting up with Yvonne Takang, who heads up an office that examines the effect free trade is having on everyday consumers here. The two discover that Dutch onions cost around a third less than homegrown varieties. But how can that be when there's already a 30% punitive import tariff on the vegetable?
30%
Import duty.
duty, but still cheaper.
Oh, and 1/3 cheaper. So there must be 50% lower cost to produce.
And as though the cheap onions weren't bad enough for the farmers, other agricultural products like garlic from China are also flooding markets in the fruitful country.
We have no chance, as you can see. We are asking time to protect our domestic markets first and build our economies before thinking of opening our markets to the world.
European overproduction is undercutting Africa's agriculture sector. Mamembale doesn't know what to do next. What happened with onions could happen just as easily with other farm products.
So this is overproduction, right? So basically, this is perishable goods. So these goods can go bad, and basically, whatever is not sold in the Netherlands is being exported.
You mean the Netherlands overproduction?
Yeah, overproduction. So they dump them in Africa. So they sell them very cheap in Cameroon, and thereby destroying the local market.
I see. The same as China.
Yeah.
Okay. Today is time, right?
Almost.
Right? Next week we'll start from here. Okay.
Right.
Unfortunately, I just lost early afternoon, recording. Oh my God.
But this is a good video, right?
Yeah, I enjoyed. Why? This.
So you see that actually we are applying double standards in Europe. So we're protecting ourselves against China, but we are not we don't allow countries in Africa to protect their industry against our products. And we're dumping just the same.
This is cotton is crashed African market many years ago, and also they cotton and also what's up?
Butter.
Butter?
Yeah.
Yeah, butter.
European butter flooded the African market because the EU, they promised a guaranteed minimum price for butter for everything you produce. So the result is a huge overproduction.